So, in the final learning exercise for this course, we're going to look at playing Yahtzee a little bit. Yahtzee is a dice game um, where you roll 5 dice and then you get to pick which dice you want to re-roll. And you try to get like a whole bunch of twos or a whole bunch of sixes or maybe a large straight or chance. Yahtzee is when you get all 5 dice the same size. If you haven't played this, there's a little online version of this that you can try out. So you simply roll the dice, and here's your dice, and then you pick which ones you want to keep. So I have a couple fives, so I'm going to keep those and see how many fives I can get. So that was my initial roll. Now I get to I've selected which one I want to keep, and I get to re-roll once. I can keep some of these if I want. I don't really like any of these. I was hoping to get some fives, so I'm going to do my second re-roll. Okay, so now I've got 3 5. So you can score this in a couple different ways. I can score by fives. I also have a 3. I could score that. It's counts. It doesn't. It's not a large straight. There's this thing called chance where I just add up all these values, and I do that. So we're going to do some of this initial stuff, just some basic stuff in our exercise here. We're certainly not going to get a full Yahtzee game going, but we'll play with some of it. So we're going to start with a new Yahtzee class. I'm going to go into BlueJ and create a new Yahtzee class. So let's do a new project. And do a new class. And in this class, I'm going to delete this sample instance here. I'm going to actually delete, I think I'll just delete everything in here and just leave this blank Yahtzee class here. And then we'll start adding things to this. Okay, let's go back to our instructions here. So we're going to declare a couple instance variables. We're going to declare an array of dice that we're going to do now. When we declare an array of dice, we've got to remember the syntax for that, and it just int brackets to show that we're doing array, the name dice, and then equals new int, and then we're going to need 5 dice, so we're going to say 5. So this will declare an array of 5 dice, dice sub 1, dice sub 2, etc. We're also going to need a couple other variables. We're going to need a scanner and a random number generator. So I'm just going to grab this code and put it in here. Save us a little time. So there's a scanner and a random number generator. Now in order to get these to work, we'll have to do a little bit of imports at the top. So I'm just going to be a little lazy. I'm just going to import java.util.star to get both the random number generator and the scanner. Okay, so that'll handle that. Now we're going to define a play game method where we're going to set up the random values for each die and then display all the dice. So let's look at that. So we're going to want to create a new method here. It's going to be a public method. Most of our methods are public. It's not going to return anything, so it can be void, and it's going to be called play game. That's what I called it, right? Yep, play game. No arguments, no parameters there. And I'm just going to initialize the dice to random values. Now this is our code for a random number generator grabbing a next integer. Now, how do I get at my dice? So my variable, my array is called dice, and so if I want to set the first element, the 0th element, I'd say dice sub 0. And if I want to set it to a random number, I would set it to this random gen next int 6. That'll give me a number between 0 and 5, and add 1 to it, it'll give me an integer 1 to 6. So this will give us a number between 1 and 6, and this will set dice 0 equal that. So once I have that, just duplicate that for the other dice. So a little bit of cutting and pasting in here, and I've got all 5 dice, so dice 0 through dice 4 here. Now I want to print out the dice. How do I go about printing out the dice on a line? And I want to do this in a loop. So I could just do, so let's just try this without a loop, and then I'll put it in a loop. So So I have a bunch of print statements that prints out dice 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now let's see if I can get this to work. Compile this. Oh, no errors. That's good. Do a new Yahtzee. And then inside that Yahtzee, I'm going to call the play game method. It prints out 5, 3, 4. It prints out my dice. Now, I'd like to have some space maybe between the dice, so I'm going to add that. And then let's talk about doing it as a loop here. So let me first say when I print out each dice, like dice 0, I want to print it out, and then I want to also print out a little bit of space. Okay, and then I'm going to do this in a loop. The only thing that's really changing here is this index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm just going to say I'm going to declare, for index equals 0, because that's the first index I need, and index. Now I could say less than or equal to 4, or I can just say less than 5. I'm going to say less than 5 because that's the number of dice I have here, and I should probably make that a final variable constant here. Let's see if we get a chance to do that in today. And I'm going to print out. So rather than printing out all of these, I'm just going to do this one statement over and over, and I'm going to comment out these for now. Okay, let's try to clean this up a little bit. Now, this is going to print out the 0th dice 5 times. So I want to make sure I print out index. So index will same 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it'll do this with a different index each time to match this. Okay, let's see if this will compile. Now, I think I forgot declare index. Yep, I did. So let's declare index. Up here, I'm going to add my index variable. That's my counter. Okay, try that again. Create a new Yahtzee class and play the game. Okay, that's printing out my dice. Now, we're going to want to do a couple things. We're going to print out the dice, and then ask this user which ones they want to re-roll. Print out the dice again, ask the user which one they want to re-roll. Print out the dice again. So we're going to want to do this a couple times. So rather than having this code in this loop here, we'd have to repeat. Let's stick this code in a method. So I'm going to, now I've got my public class here, and here's my play game method. It goes all the way down to that brace. So after that brace, I'm going to say public, and this is not going to return anything, void, and it's just going to display the dice. So I'm going to call it display dice, no parameters, and set this up. And I'm just going to move this code down here, paste it in. I'm also going to move my index. I don't actually want it up there because I only need it in this one method, really. Or I want usually counter variables you declare in each method where you're going to use them. So I'm going to use that here. Okay, so now I have display dice here, and then up here I can call display dice. Now I could probably do the similar stuff for this initialization, make an initialization method, but I'm trying to go through relatively quickly today, so I'm not going to do that. Feel free to do that if you want. Okay, so this should do the same thing as before now. Display my dice. Now I have the display dice method, but I'm going to play the game, and that will call display dice after doing random numbers. Okay, so that'll display my dice. Now we're going to ask the user to re-roll some dice. Now that method's a little complicated, so I have the code here. Just highlight it, copy it, and then go into your code and paste it in a spot. So it has to be in a method. So again, these brown gold sections each are methods. So I'm going to be after each one of those. I'm going to paste in the re-roll method. So let's look at what this does. This is going to go through each die and ask the user if we should re-roll it. So I'm going to go for, here I'm using my counter is I, so for I equals 0, I less than equal to, now what's this dice.length? Here I used 5. Well, it turns out every array that I declare, when we set it up for 5, it stores that 5 in a special argument, or I mean a such attribute called its length. So rather than saying 5 or remembering 5, you can always say the name of the array dot length. So even up here I could change this to dice dot length, and it'll work for any size array. So that's really handy to use. We use that a lot because it'll work for any size array. So I'm going to change that to dice.length too. Okay, so dice.length and I equals I plus 1 or I plus plus here, because I'm getting tired of writing I equals I plus 1. And this is the same thing. Okay, then I print out rerolling die whatever 1, which is a 4. And yeah, do you want to re-roll it? Yes, no. And I read in their answer into a string variable, and then I compare their answer to y. And if they say yes, I say re-rolling this die, and I set the die with this index, the one that I'm in the loop, the die I just printed out, to a new random number. And it'll go through this and do this 5 times for each dice. So let's go into, now I've got that method here. I want to call it. I'm going to display my dice, and I'm going to call reroll method up here. Compile that. And now let's play that. So new dice, or new Yahtzee class. Now I've got all these methods. I just going to keep remembering to call the play game method because that's the main one. I print out the dice and I ask them re-rolling stuff. I've got to work on some spacing. I got to make sure I put a space after I print these dice out, I guess. New line. Okay, re-rolling dice 4. So I've got a 4 and a couple 5s and a couple 3s. I'm going to re-roll the 4. I'm going to keep the 5 and the 5. I'm going to re-roll the 3s. And I'm done. Now, we can keep going through this again a little bit more. I'm going to want to re-roll these dice again after I display them. So let's fix a couple things. Right now, I'm printing out the dice and then not printing out a print line. So I want to make sure here in display dice, I print out the dice, and I'm using print there. Dot out dot print line. And so make sure I do a print line. So I print out the dice and then I go to the new line. And then back in my main program, I'm going to do a couple things. I'm going to display the dice and re-roll, and I'm going to display the dice and re-roll again. So this will do my initial roll, and then I'll display the dice. I'll re-roll, display the dice, re-roll, and then I should probably display the dice one last time. Okay. So let's see how that's working. New Yahtzee object, run the play game method. Okay, I got a 5, a 6, a 1, a 3, or 4. So I can decide what I want to keep. This could be a straight. In Yahtzee, one of the things you want to keep is a straight. So maybe I want to re-roll the 1, and I'm going to keep the 5, 6, 3, 4. So let's say I'm going to say re-roll no, no. Reroll the 1, no, no. Okay, now I've got 2 3s. Oh, maybe I'll just do that. Maybe I'll say yes, reroll the 5, yes, reroll the 6, keep the 3, keep the other 3, and reroll the 4. And so now I end up with this. 3, 6, 6, I mean, it's 3, 6, 3, 3, 2. Okay, so that gets us close to the Yahtzee thing. I've modified the play game method, so re-roll is called twice after the original roll. Now we're going to do a couple things. First, let's write a method that counts how many times a given die appears in the dice array. So let's say at this point I want to score my 3s, and then I want to print out how many 3s I have. So in this case I have 3 3s, but I want to count that. So I'm going to ask the user, what die do you want to score? And then count how many of those there are. So let's go into our main method here. So back in our play game method, I'm going to do an output, say system dot out dot print line, and ask which value do you want to count. So then they can enter something like 3 or something like that. So I better read that into some variable. So I'm going to declare an integer value to count and set that equal to scanner dot next int. I declared scanner up here already, so that's already set. Scanner.nextInt will read the next integer there. And now I want to print out, I want to count those things. So I'm going to go through my array and check if dice 1 equal to this, dice 2 equal to this, and then finally I want to print out the count of how many times this equals. So see, why don't you pause this, see if you can write the code for this. This is good to try to force your brain to think about loops and arrays and how you might use it. So you want to do this and try it out. So when I'm working on things, I often can't figure out the full solution, so I try to just do little parts. So let's say I wanted to count threes and how many threes there are and print that count out. So what I can do is I can just check if dice sub 0 is equal to 3. I know how to check the 0th dice. And if so, I'm just going to have a count variable. I'm just going to say count equals 0 and then count equals count plus 1. And then I can print out count at the end here. So after I do this, I can say something like you have count dice of value 3. And then I know how to do this not only, I know this is a partial solution now. I don't always want to check for threes. I want to check for the value to count each time. I just did 3 because that's what I could just think of right away. And I don't want to just count the 0th dice. I want to do all the dice. So I can do this in loop. Sometimes in order to do it in loop, I've got to kind of put this out here a little bit. So how would I do this with lots of, do these what I call unroll the loop, do it without a loop, just to start seeing my pattern. So if dice 0 equals 3, add 1 to the count. If dice 1, that's the next dice is a 3, then I'm going to add 1 to the count. And if dice 2 is a 3, I'm going to add 1 to a count. So I should imagine that dice is an array of values that I'm looking at. So in my mind, when I think of this dice array, this array of values here, what I'm kind of visualizing is an array called dice, and there's these indexes 0, 1, 2, 3, and it stores different values. And again, right now we're storing dice values between 1 and 6. So 1 might be a 4, 3, 2. And I'm going to go through and look. So this is dice of 0, this is dice of 1, this is dice of 3, and this is what's stored in each location is those values. So I'm kind of thinking of that and going through each one. So it helps to have some sort of mental picture sometimes for this as you're writing this code. So checking if dice 0 is 3, if dice 1 is 3, if dice 2 is 3. So I'm checking each of those dice. Checking if dice 0 is 3, is dice 1 3, is dice 2 3, is dice 3, all these ones are what their values are. And adding 1 to count each time. So now I'm seeing a pattern here. So I can do some sort of loop in here for I equals 0, I less than, and I'm going to use my dice.length again, I plus plus, and I'm going to do one of these statements each time in here. But I'm going to check for I each time. So now I don't have to be doing all these. I've moved this inside my loop, and so this loop should set I equals 0, I less than or equal to 5 the dice length, and if dice sub I equals 3, I add 1 to the count. So then this will say how many 3s I have. But I really want to change this so that I count, that they say, I ask which value you want to count, and they enter that value to count. I want to use that here instead of 3. And when I print it out, I want to print that out. So let's see if I can change this print out to print that out also. Okay, let's see if we can compile this and run this again. So here's my Yahtzee class, create a new object, run the play gain method. Okay, I've got these. I'm going to re-roll the 2 and the 3. I'm going to keep the 4 and the other 4 and re-roll the 5. So now I didn't get any more 4s. I'm trying to get 4s. Okay, re-roll that, keep that 4, re-roll that 5. I still didn't get any 4s. But I'm going to count the number of 4s, and I have 2. So it says you have 2 4s, or 2 dice of value 4. Okay, so that's one thing I can do is just count them. Another thing is a good thing to practice loops, and we use in Yahtzee, is to print out the total of all the dice. So can you make a method that'll print out all the total of all the dice? And again, another thing let's look at before we go there, I guess. Let's look at this and try to make this into a method. So I've got this thing in here that counts the dice. I'm going to change this. Now, why would I want to do this? Well, one is this breaks my code up a little better, but also when we're working with Yahtzee, often we want to score other things. We'll want to like score Yahtzee 5 of a kind. In that case, I want to count the dice and see if I have 5 of one of them. Full outs, I have 3 of one dice and 2 of another dice. It's nice to be able to count that and have a count function to do this. So there's a number of places where I want to count the number of dice of a certain value besides just scoring certain things. So I'm going to move this into a method here. So let's look at what I want to move into a method. So I'm going to add another method here, and I'm going to start it out as a public void count die, no arguments to start with, and set it up this way. Now, I'm going to leave some of this. I want to make a generic method just counts the dice. And so I don't want to do this ask what value you want to count. I want to leave that in the main program. But starting here and not the printout, I'm going to move this stuff into this method. So I'm going to cut this out, move this into my count die method. And I'm going to call count die here, like I've done before. But sometimes when you extract code out and put it here, there are ties back and forth in the main program. It's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever taken a cell phone apart, you try to take the screen apart, there's little cables that tie the screen to the rest of the phone parts. Or it's the same with the battery. If you try to take a battery out, there are these different little cables that tie in to the rest of the thing. So even though I've pulled this out, I've got to kind of watch these ties back and forth. So if I compile, I'll see a couple things here. First, count. Now I have count here, and I want to print that out up here. So I'm counting this stuff here, creating this count, but I want to get that from this method back up here. I called this method, and I want to return some value back up here. So how do we return a value up there? Well, we put in a return statement. I have the count. I can say return the count up here. Now, if I'm going to do that, return an integer count, I need to make sure when I declare my method, I say public int count. So I'm returning something. Now that should work. But now how do I get the count up here? Well, count die will return this method. So whenever we call a method that returns a value, we shouldn't call it on a line by itself. We should call it inside a print statement or something like that. So rather than calling on a line by itself, I'm going to call it in here. You have count die values. So that'll help with this count stuff, and now I'm returning the count. So that helps with part of it. Now when I compile it again, this value to count, I need this in my count die method, but I read it up here. So somehow I've got to get this value to count value down into this method. I call the method here, and I want to pass this value down here. So if I want to pass information down to a method, I can use a parameter. So I can put this value to count here as a actual parameter, and here I can put it. Now in here, as a formal parameter, I have to say int value to count. So I have to declare the type like it was a variable, and I can use it as a variable. So what this will do is take this value to count, pass it to this method, and initialize the value of this variable value to count here, and I can use it in my method. So now I'm passing information down here and then returning information back up here, and it should compile and run just the same. Okay, so let's do one more method. Like I was saying, let's do a method to sum up the values of all the dice. So in here, I want to just do, where I'm printing out the count, I want to do something similar. I'm going to say the sum of the dice is, and then I'm going to have a method called sum dice. Now I don't need to pass any parameters to it, but I will want to return the sum here. So no parameter or arguments, but I will want to return a value and print that out. So see if you can write sum dice. Sum dice should sum up all the dice. You should go through each loop. So one easy way is you can just say dice 0 plus dice 1, dice plus dice 2 plus dice 3, and return that. You can also do it in loops, so somehow, and I'm not going to show you this. So see if you can write sum dice based on some of these other dice that'll sum up all the dice and return its value in the same way we return count. But it will not have any arguments, kind of like here. So see if you can write this sum dice to print out the sum of all the dice. Okay. Now, if you want to be more adventurous, do a couple more things. You can write a method that checks for Yahtzee and displays if there's a Yahtzee, or a method that checks for a straight and displays a straight, or checks for a full house. I'll post values some, and then those are all bonuses, so you can stop this video now, or I'll give you a quick summary of those next if you want to stay around and see those. Okay, so let's look at some of these variables options. Now, one of the cool things that's available with arrays is there's a special method to sort an array, and we can sort an array easily. So one thing we can do is when we display the array, we can sort it ahead of time. So like here I have my display dice. I'm going to call this arrays.sort here. Now if I compile, it's not going to find that, so I have to make sure I include the right. Okay, I was confused. It does work. As long as you're including java.util.star, it'll also include the array stuff. So arrays.sort, and dice will sort the arrays. So now if I compile and run this, when it ever displays the dice, it'll display them in sorted order. Oops, I ran display dice first. I want to do play game. Okay. It displays the dice in sorted order all the time, lowest to highest, which is kind of helpful when we're checking for things like Yahtzee and other objects. So let's look at some solutions for how you might check for Yahtzee. So with Yahtzee, you simply want to count the number of dice. So if you have all sixes, if you have 6 sixes or 6 ones. So if you have a count method, you can actually use that count method and count, but the value you want to count, you can just grab the first die's value and see if you have 5 of those. So let's look at some different ways of counting Yahtzee. So if you're sorting the dice, one option is to just check if the first dice and the last dice are equal. If these are sorted and the first and the last dice are equal, then you have Yahtzee. So this is one example. So we just check if dice sub 0 equals dice sub length minus 1, the last one, and then we return true or false. And this is a Boolean function that calculates Yahtzee. Here's another, this is a longer way. This is if dice 1 equals dice 0 equals dice 1, and dice 0 equals 2, dice 2 equals dice 3. So this doesn't assume the dice are sorted, but it checks if dice 0 is equal to each of the other dice, and then returns true or false. Here's our count. We're counting the number of dice, and if the count is 5, we return true, otherwise we return false. So again, if you have this count method for other things, that's a nice way of doing it. Let's look at another option. Let's check for a straight, 5 dice that are in order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In dice, I think in Yahtzee there's both a short and a long straight, small and large, short and long, straight. But this is the long one. All the dice are in sequence. So let's look at some options for doing that. So you can actually do the check. There are just two possibilities: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 2 through 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you can check actually those. This actually checks if dice 0 is 1, and again assumes we've sorted the dice. If dice 0 is 1, dice 1 is 2, dice 2 is 3, and return true. Otherwise, it checks if we have a 2, 3, 4, 5, and turns true. Otherwise, we return false. Another option is that we just go through the whole array and check if each dice is not equal to the next dice minus 1, to actually check if they're in order, and returns false if it finds any case where a dice is not equal to the next dice minus 1 for that. So there's two alternatives for checking for a straight. Straights are kind of hard to check for. Last one is checking for a full house. So that's like 3 of one dice, like 3 5s and 2 2s or something like that. So we can do that in a couple ways. So the easiest way I've found to check for full house is, so that's when we have like 2 2 5 5 5. So if you sort the dice and you count the number of the 0th dice and the number of the last dice values, you should have 2 of one and 3 of the other. Now you might have 3 2s and 2 5s or whatever, but you should always have 2 and 3 of those. So we'll sort the dice. We'll count the number of times the 0th die appears, and then we'll also count the number of times the last die appears, and we'll check. We should have 3 and then 2, or 2 and then 3. So we'll check. Those are the two chances for a full house. Return true in those cases and false otherwise. So these are the ways you can do check for some of these stuff. So this is some good building blocks to actually create a full Yahtzee game. So feel free to try this out, play with this some more if you want to keep working on Yahtzee.